Hey, and welcome to episode 5 of State of the Hack, our unscripted show here out of FireEye's Alexandria office in Virginia.
I'm Christopher Glyer.
I'm Nick Carr. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the show or about us, definitely watch some of the previous episodes where we get into that. We have a lot of things we want to talk about today. We have them listed here about our trip to Congress, a TEMP.Periscope update, and our overall threat activity roundup.
And of course, you can't forget the T-shirts. It's World Cup month, so
yes,
England jersey and a
Czech Republic I think
ish jersey.
I'm a big soccer fan.
So we've all got jerseys on today, and then we're going to have Dan Perez on, who's coming to talk to us about TEMP.Periscope and the blog that we released yesterday about a bunch of activity with TEMP.Periscope targeting Cambodia.
Good deal. So I guess let's just get right into it.
So this week you went to Congress, recently you went to Congress, right?
Absolutely. And so we were invited to Congress to an industry roundtable on artificial intelligence. So they had multiple industries represented, and they wanted us to represent the cybersecurity industry and just sort of talk about helping the Department of Defense cut through machine learning to understand what it means to us as a company, to our industry, learn hopefully from some of our lessons and challenges. And as the Department of Defense is trying to prioritize their investments in artificial intelligence. They're doing a bunch of, they have high aspirations for the things they want to do with it. So they wanted to learn from companies like ours that have done a lot.
What was like the format of the I guess the briefing or? Yes.
So I had some experience prior, while I was in the government, of doing a private hearing, and they aren't always as, it is a nice interaction being on the private sector side versus being sort of called in front of them. So it's a very friendly setup, and it's a roundtable with, this was with the House Armed Services Committee. So several representatives were at the table, and the room has staffers, and you basically start with an overview of you and your company, and then you give like a 5-minute opening statement, and then it's a roundtable and questions, and you learn about legislation that's being introduced to help provide policy that supports these kinds of investments.
Do you tell them to like AI or ML, all the things?
Yeah. So, right, AI, exactly why they brought the cybersecurity industry to represent people doing artificial intelligence for the sake of artificial intelligence for the sake of marketing, I suppose. But we were just there to talk about how we've successfully built it and some cautionary tales about where we haven't. So, yeah, it was very insightful for me too, because we were the only people from our industry to see people from industries that have built out more in the machine vision field and stuff like that.
Was there anything that you learned in particular from like another group that was there about like an interesting application of AI or ML against some problem or data set they had?
Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of the video investment that other people make that's just totally foreign to me, because we don't really do a lot with video data. But overall, it was interesting to hear the other panelists sort of agree that there can be a lot learned from private industry, specifically how a lot of the problems are already solved. We sort of know what processors work better for machine learning applications. We have algorithms. We have hardware that is sort of set up, and a lot of the work needs to be done on the particular application, or most of the work needs to be done with organizing and centrally collecting the data and
labeling data.
That's
the hardest part, right?
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting being there from FireEye, because we don't really talk about it that much, but we have 10 plus years of labeled sandbox data from our appliances, and we have close to that the amount of intelligence data we have from all of our services engagements. So we kind of came into this whole thing, and our data science team had a leg up with the vast amount of data that we have.
Yeah, we have a wealth of data to use. And then this month in the last month, we've released 2 pretty interesting blog posts. Matt Berninger and Awalin Sapalan basically released a blog post on how we're using machine learning specifically for our kind of managed defense, our SOC teams, in terms of basically taking the labels and predictions of analysts going through and reviewing alerts, and how we can then turn that into a model that then predicts whether a future alert will be malicious or not.
Yeah, reverse engineering the analyst is the post if you want to look it up.
Why I like the post is because they actually walk through instead of just telling you the result, they actually tell you kind of all the different steps they did to get there and some of the different trade-offs and pros and cons. And it's a really great blog post they put together. But how we're using it is to make our analysts more efficient so that they can then spend more of their human time on the things, which isn't just, is this alert good or bad, but then figuring out from there, then, okay, well, what do I do with that? Like, do I need to, pull more data and investigate further? Yep. Like, let machines do what they're good at in terms of recognizing patterns and behaviors, et cetera, and then let the humans spend their time on the things that maybe require a bit more, cognitive, it's harder to automate, like investigating.
Yeah, and I think overall it was it was interesting sharing with them the perspective of working with the analysts to build all the systems. That's a really cool thing that Matt and Awalin did for that project, was sitting down and involving the analyst, making sure the systems make sense to them and aren't blind machine learning systems. That you're not using a neural network to help blindly predict whether an alert might be a true positive and confidence levels around a new technique. So that was really important, I think, again, in sharing to Congress to involve the warfighter with what you're building out and build a system that is transferable. And then hopefully for other people that are interested in doing it, I'd really recommend checking out that post. And we're trying to get a little bit better about sharing our experiences with implementing these systems. The other, we just released another blog post this week on PowerShell machine learning and measuring maliciousness, right?
Yeah, Victor Fang, who's one of our data scientists, a bunch of us worked together. Victor was kind of the primary person on the research, but we took a specific area of artificial intelligence called natural language processing, which is similar to what, say, Alexa does when you give her an instruction, or I don't know if there's any around if it'll like fire it off, but or if you do, like, say, use Google Translate. NLP is basically the domain of artificial intelligence that's used. So if you think of PowerShell as a language, what you're trying to do is figure out kind of what is the intent of what the person is trying to get across. And there's multiple ways that you can, because of the way the language is set, you don't always have to have the full length of, say, dash non-interactive. You can have, 15 different combinations of that to accomplish the same thing. So you can actually then boil that down to kind of a token or value that you're trying to then imply what you want. And so we've taken a bunch of the label and trained data that we have, trained models in NLP to then figure out can we figure out and predict whether this machine learning or this particular PowerShell command is good or bad, or malicious or benign. And so it's a challenge. Like, PowerShell is really hard to figure that out because so many applications legitimately use it, and admins that would otherwise look, take like an encoded command. Tons of people use encoded commands. I did some research this week. I took one environment that had 5,000 endpoints, and there were 1,700 some encoded commands run in a 6-month period, of which only 65 were bad. So it's about a 3% that were bad, and mostly the reason why that number is actually so high in terms of 65 is because, especially with malware, it runs fairly frequently, often with the same command. So you're going to get the same piece of malware running every 5, 10, every hour or something. But that's still a relatively small percentage of maliciousness in the overall scheme of what's out there. So you can't just look for something like, tell me every time there's an encoded command, because you'd blow up your sock. And then on each of those encoded commands, they would then need to then decode either sometimes once or with some Ansible actually double encodes it. I don't know why. But you would then need to decode it and then trim that down and then look at what it's actually running from an encoding perspective. And so the algorithm we've come up with from a PowerShell perspective actually takes decoding or encoding and decoding into account and actually has that. So it'll actually decode it on the fly and then run the decoded contents through the algorithm.
Awesome. I mean, I know there's a lot of varying opinions, especially on Twitter and stuff like that, about the utility of it. Certainly, or machine learning implementations that could just be static decision trees and mathematical formulas. It's super cool to look at a good implementation of it and see something like we have an interactive prompt where you can type in PowerShell commands and it's dynamically scoring the confidence level that what you're typing is malicious. And if you think of the utility there for informing our red teamers and others who are trying to accomplish a task and know based on this super large data set and make real-time decisions on how bad something is. It's kind of cool to see the blue team side and the red team side and all that. The one thing I did want to leave, I left the Congressional folks with, and would like to leave you guys with on this, was chatting with our data science team. I'm not a data scientist. I'm a user of the system and a trainer of the models, I suppose. But we tried to give them a call to action and some things that we've seen work in our industry. Things between how we share data from an indicator perspective that we're hoping can translate over to data science applications. But the big one for me that was personal to me is as we look and we try to hire people onto our teams here and discuss the overall, I guess, talent shortage in the industry, there's a lot of really cool programs that the cybersecurity industry has used, like Scholarship for Service to exchange paying for people's technical grad school for a service commitment to the government within cybersecurity. The push from our data science team was to suggest programs like that for data scientists and data engineers. So we're hopeful that we'll get some progress there, and then on things like H-1B visa sponsorship issues, I guess, we continue to have struggles there. So speaking of hiring strong talent from the government, I'd like to bring on our guest, Dan Perez, from the Adversary Pursuit team.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Hey. So last month we had Andrew Thompson, who's also on the Adversary Pursuit team, and this month Dan Perez, who can talk about a bunch of things, including TEMP.Periscope, which we'll get into in a second. But can you give us a little bit of your background and how you made it over here?
Sure. So, a couple years ago, I joined the military right out of high school. Didn't know what I wanted to do with myself, so decided to join the submarine force. So I was on the sub force for about 5 years, did a couple deployments, and then, decided I needed to get out, go to school, and do that thing. So, as soon as I got out, decided to go to college right away, try to get my education started, and had to get some money. So, I started teaching swim lessons again, something that I used to do before the military and stuff like that. So one of the parents one day just came up to me. He knew that I was in the military, and he was like, "Hey, you're in the military, right?" I was like, "Yes, sir." You got a clearance?" "Yes." "Well, I need somebody that has a clearance and wants to do cybersecurity." So it just kind of fell into my lap, and ever since then, I started working with contractors and eventually to the government, and sitting here with you guys right now at FireEye. So
it's such a testament to the small community too, because the three of us actually all worked together previously on different work. So
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't take another chance at not working with these guys again. So it's pretty awesome to be able to work with these guys side by side every day, and be able to get some ideas and stuff like that, and learn new things every day. So it's really cool.
So we released a blog post this week about TEMP.Periscope, specifically targeting Cambodia, basically a bunch of different government agencies in Cambodia, the Election Commission, and then some of the opposition party. So Dan was pretty critical to that analysis. So that's kind of the result of what we published. Maybe we can wind back to the beginning of, like, where do we start? How do we, like, what was the first lead that we got, and how do we kind of pull on that thread to get to the data we found and what we eventually published about all the different compromises from TEMP.Periscope?
So and mad props goes to mainly the APJ folks, our team that's in APJ. So Marchin and a couple of the other guys that are out there. So they initially received the tip from the individual that's named in the blog. Somebody provided us an email, and they were working it. They eventually found out that it was Airbrake. So Airbrake is a JavaScript downloader
So the email itself then dropped a backdoor?
Yep. So email had an attachment, which then downloaded, initialized, download for Airbrake malware, which is also known as Reflow downloader, JavaScript downloader. So from there, the APJ folks work at a different time frame. So, I come online and see, Airbrake. I've worked a couple client engagements with, these same guys.
Yeah. We've seen them a bunch recently, especially in the last year, yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, hey, let me take a look and see. So, they decided that that was it, Airbrake. And so I was like, with all the, flare analysis that we've done with Airbrake before and all these client engagements, we've had a really, really good understanding of how their infrastructure works, really, their back end, Airbrake, how it works on the back end and stuff like that. So I was like, hey, maybe they have their logs up. Who knows? So I just took a random URL and luckily got fairly lucky with the http log.txt file that came down and had all these interesting targets, IP addresses, and the really interesting thing that Airbrake does is that there's a cookie value in the GET request that calls back home to its Airbrake server. That cookie value can get decoded, and it includes like the username, the host name of the system. So it's fairly easy to line up, targets,
like victim,
and victimology, and everything like that. So it's fairly interesting to see that these guys were utilizing Airbrake and stuff like that. So along those lines,
So sorry, when we say it's Airbrake at that point, because there's a lot of discussion about tracking activities versus doing attribution and groups and malware. So when it's Airbrake, do you know who it is, or how do we categorize that activity?
So FireEye is one of those companies that since I've been here, I've always been told we do not attribute based off malware families. So we're a big proponent of, getting down to the nitty-gritty, finding NBIs, other infrastructure overlaps, any other
NBIs are network-based infrastructure.
Indicators.
Network-based indicators, whichever. So we didn't really have that at the very beginning. So we initially started what Andrew spoke to last time he was on, is an UNC group or uncategorized group. We do track a couple of other groups that do use Airbrake. But for the most part, those are either A, suspected TEMP.Periscope, or most likely that it is TEMP.Periscope. So we spun up a quick UNC group at first, and we were able to do some pivoting around with other members of the team. So Steve Miller helped out, was paramount in finding other samples fairly quickly that were uploaded from Cambodia. And from there, we found more Airbrake downloaders, and in one instance, one of those Airbrake downloaders eventually, the payload was like another Airbrake or Reflow JavaScript downloader that called back to a C2 server that we had been tracking as TEMP.Periscope initially. So
then we were able to tie the two activity clusters and groups and say
exactly
this was TEMP.Periscope.
Yeah, so it eventually led to a merge of the two groups, and we were able to say, oh, this is definitely TEMP.Periscope, and this is fairly interesting targeting for these guys. It's not something that we've normally seen.
So what have we normally seen, I guess, or how is this different?
Yeah, so normally we've seen them targeting, defense industrial base or, mostly commercial espionage type or military espionage. So, targeting, military data or
research labs,
education.
With sort of a maritime focus, right?
With a maritime focus, right. So this kind of was threw us for a loop for a little bit, but once we started Googling around and checking out what was going on between Cambodia and China, it looks like Cambodia is one of China's biggest proponents for the South China Seas issues that is going on right now. So with the election going on,
And the election's at the end of this month,
the 29th,
right?
yeah, July 29th. So with the election going on and this possible party that may,
have a different position or maybe not be as supportive.
Cause Cambodia to have a different position, it was probably pretty paramount that they needed to do something to see what was going on.
So do you consider this a shift from kind of the targeting profile of TEMP.Periscope, or is it in line with maybe what you'd expect?
I would say it's more in line with what we would expect these guys. I mean, with the South China Seas issues and everything, it's maritime related. It may just be...
It's just political organizations or governmental,
right.
Not, military or
general contractor
right.
or something like that, yeah.
I think the new interest, and especially as you described, our experience with this group led to more understanding and more visibility into their activity. It's interesting to me, I sort of expect this kind of election-based targeting has always gone on a lot of places, but we're certainly seeing more of that, and the U.S. 2016 election was obviously big new, or raised awareness of this sort of thing with a new whole subset of the public.
Yep.
I'm interested to see if we'll have more visibility in this kind of activity.
Yeah, and from my understanding, there's a bunch of other elections going on in that region, so it's possible, as well.
Now, there's from the blog post, there were a couple other key points. There was a Scanbox server, and we didn't really describe it a whole lot in the blog post. So maybe you can describe that. And then we saw logins from an IP address in an island off China called Hainan. So maybe you want to explain kind of the significance of both of those two.
Sure. So yeah, one of the servers was basically like a Scanbox server. Scanbox is one of those frameworks that allows the attacker to kind of like take a look at what's actually calling out to the server. So profile, like basically like a profiler. And they can then deliver a payload or certain payload custom tailored to that.
Yep.
So there's the point there that
host.
you want to know like what version of like Reader and JavaScript or
Java.
yeah, like Reader, Java, a bunch of other applications, and then
Exactly.
throw the right exploit.
Exactly.
Or, okay.
Yep.
Target certain people, and then I guess put guardrails in place that
Right.
are more associated with nation state.
And we saw
activity.
similar activity that with the backswing profiler in
Yep.
the NotPetya, or was it NotPetya or
Bad Rabbit.
Bad Rabbit? Sorry, yeah, I'm getting my worms
same.
confused. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anything, I guess, anything interesting? You mentioned the island, the IP is related to. I mean,
Yeah.
I know we didn't come forward and say anything, but just you as Dan Perez, if you have any.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty interesting that there's that one IP that kind of threw us for a loop at one point. And we're like, oh, this is pretty interesting that we have, this IP that is geolocated in Hainan province. These guys targeting maritime data and and stuff like that. And there's a fairly large and significant naval base that's based out of Hainan province. So it's not definitely for sure, but it's pretty interesting. There's a couple of other IPs that definitely look like VPSs and stuff, but
Yep.
this one kind of stood out as
Interesting.
like a outlier.
And is there a reason why we put more credence to this particular IP address than maybe others? Because we all know attackers can spin up infrastructure anywhere and make it look like they're coming from somewhere. What made this particular one different in terms of like why we maybe place more significance?
I would say probably like when we did some like frequency analysis on the servers and stuff like that, it kind of looked like time base. It was in that time zone, as well as when we were looking in like Shodan results and stuff like that. So we use open source tools like everybody
Yep.
else. Some of the other two servers that came up looked like they were VPS servers at one point in time, and this one didn't really have too much like other than like Hainan geolocated.
Right.
And
And then there were
stuff
also
like that.
keyboard settings too, right? When you
Yeah.
guys did the analysis.
And there's definitely keyboard settings that come in, like accepted language in those GET requests for the connections. That's definitely Chinese language connection settings. So it was pretty interesting, and it was
Nice.
for all of those connections to the C2 server. It was like
That's why I love having you have like an ex-Navy submariner, taking a look at what might be maritime-based targeting for a group that might be the Navy.
I mean, it was awesome work, and the entire team just did great work. So it was much kudos to the entire team.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So do we want to talk a little bit about some other activity we're seeing around the company?
Sure.
Some things we're taking a look at. I know that you and I have been talking about this mythical Office 365 API
Right.
that might be worth bringing up. I know we might speak about it in the future.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. So there's multiple different investigative firms, Kroll, CrowdStrike, and FireEye, I think all kind of got to the same place or a similar place in that there's an API or basically an undocumented API that Microsoft basically has. And if you kind of pulled and correlate a couple different sources or API requests, you could figure out what emails a user had read. And the reason why, from an investigative perspective, why this is important is, we often get victims who get, say, their credentials compromised or something else. Attacker logs in as that victim. If we can't figure out from a legal perspective what emails were accessed, then you need to usually consider that all of the data in that email inbox could be at risk. And so we want to be as accurate as we can in terms of what was or wasn't accessed. And so the API, we were able to do some research and trial and error. And Josh Madeley has actually done a bunch of work here along with our
Doug Beanstalk
as well, had done a bunch of work and research because it's not really documented, to figure out how they could then use the different activity APIs to figure out what emails were actually opened and read by the attacker. So it's kind of interesting how it came about, though, because there's different research by different teams, and like the one thread kind of connecting all of them were lawyers. Most or many investigative firms, we have to work probably half or more of our investigations involve lawyers of some kind, especially external counsel, and external counsel works with lots of different firms. So
I think I remember getting contacted asking from a lawyer we work with a lot, like, do you guys have access to the secret API? So all the legal community was certainly excited and interested about it. And
right.
They're a big source of referrals and everything like that for the investigations we do.
Yeah. So and then a bunch of the different firms were all about to kind of start talking about it publicly right around the same time, or maybe one did, and then the others felt obligated to. And then Microsoft has recently shut down the API, so it's kind of a moot point now in terms of like releasing tools or blog posts or other things. So hopefully in the future, they'll open something up, because I know from a victim perspective, it's incredibly useful to be able to state definitively like what has or hasn't been opened or accessed.
That's what was interesting, was data that's not accessible via the
like traditional
proper logging, even if you had it enabled. But then that came with this double-edged sword, where the opinion seems to be that a couple of our firms felt people weren't totally understanding it and were misrepresenting that data. So I guess that's both sides of having I think it got referred to as a defer 0 day, which I don't like that. But, when something is undocumented in that way, it was really helpful, but misinterpreted by others. So I'm really looking forward to hopefully us being able to put out more data about it, and ideally Microsoft, pushing to expose more of that data, because it was very helpful.
Sure.
Anything else? I know we've been taking a look at a few things on our adversary methods team. We tend to just, at FireEye, we're looking at high level, all this telemetry, all this data coming in, as we talked about with the machine learning stuff. It's there's just a ton of data here from telemetry data from all of our products and services. It can be a little bit overwhelming to cast that wide net and be looking across. So we tend to get deep and sort of snipe as opposed to casting a net. And we'll take a look at a particular method. We're taking a look at a few methods recently, but the deep link, Matt Nelson from Spectre Ops released and coordinated a particular exploit, I guess, that worked on Windows 10 systems.
Right.
And anything that you found interesting about the technique offhand? It had a very small attack surface, but just like looking at the scriptlets and looking at different publicly released methods, we like to take a look at sort of everything. Be okay with looking at false positives to filter through and watch as you see attackers adopt these techniques to get insight into their thought process for how they might try to further weaponize and combine techniques.
And then researchers trolling you because they know that you're looking at what they're posting.
There's more and more of that, which is, keep in mind, that's good intelligence data too. We'll track submitter IDs and stuff like that. So go ahead and keep it up. It was interesting to me actually that so many people found it interesting, or journalists were picking up on it. One thing that I was trying to be clear about is from our team's perspective, this is a very small attack surface, made much smaller now.
Have we seen it used in the wild very much?
Yeah, about a week after. So there's a lot of testing. Then about a week after it was rolled out, there was in the wild delivery. A Korean sender has been sending it around a lot. So the typical normal groups that seem to want to use it, criminal groups or a lot of, I think there was a couple coin mining things. Then other stuff where we were catching it before the infrastructure was live. So there's a lot of them that we've shared. We tend to try to share the public samples. And we were, of course, looking through our telemetry, sort of watching. The response has been interesting there, though, because Microsoft seems to have changed the tune some with their reaction to it. And I believe they've actually fixed the issue in Office 2016. So that attack surface has become even smaller.
So basically, you'd have to be running Windows 10 and not Office 2016
Yeah,
to
I
then.
don't even know if you can do that, but
Yeah, I don't know if you can either. But yeah, so fairly small attack surface. I don't think it's going to be used a whole lot going forward. But it was a pretty interesting technique to see. I love a bunch of the research that the Spectre Ops guys do and come up with. They're always kind of pushing the bounds of how to kind of creatively use what's there natively provided by the operating system in a way that maybe wasn't designed or
Yep.
intended, but is creative nonetheless and bypasses certain techniques or built-in assumptions.
the only other one I had is working with Dan's team and responding to some targeted nation-state use of the ruler utility, which was put out by SensePost. There's actually several components within there. CrowdStrike, Tim Perez at CrowdStrike had put out a really good blog previously on forms persistence using ruler and Outlook rule persistence, obviously. And this is the Outlook homepage persistence, like an HTML page that is persistent and gives you a shell. And so it's a fully patched CVE, but just maybe not widely implemented. And it presented some detection challenges, and we're seeing targeted groups use it.
When you say persistence, like does it, just so you can explain to the audience, like does it actually have a persistence mechanism on the host you're investigating?
Yeah.
Or what's the, what forensic artifacts show up from that?
Yeah, so about the only place we are lucky enough to have visibility into the file write events. So our detection point has been when these are loaded and written to disk, the HTML page written to disk. But the difficulty with ruler and any kind of Outlook-based persistence and Outlook techniques is, of course, getting back to the Activities API. If you use Office 365, your ability to search in particular areas or the location of those artifacts and your detection points might change. But overall, it's pretty interesting. There's only one public sample that I could find where someone had uploaded it and seeing targeted attackers use it multiple places. We at least found it interesting, so we've been taking a look at that as well.
Have we seen many groups use it in terms of in the wild?
Yes, we have several groups that have used it in the wild of several that we tie back to actually several named APT groups. So from multiple countries. So I would expect what I take away from that is that attackers have done their research and they feel that it has either worked other places or they don't suspect detection is very good for it. So yeah, we got our eye out for it.
Awesome.
Any other stuff you guys have been working on, even just high level? You said APT-10, if those guys been keeping you guys busy too?
APT-10 has continued to keep us busy. Fin7 still keeps us busy every day. And then, of course, Dad Bod, man.
That's
Oh,
right.
yeah, I forgot.
We forgot for his intro.
Yeah, this is the infamous person who came up with the malware named Dadbod.
Yep.
So the way it works here is investigators or analysts, if you find a sample of malware, you can at least propose a name for it as long as it fits our naming scheme.
I think
It
Nick
can get vetoed.
I think Nick put it very well on Twitter, is that naming malware is a science, but getting it past that review process is an art.
Nice.
So I'm very happy that Dadbod made it through, and that's kudos to my wife. She's the one that came up with that one.
Awesome.
For sure.
All right. Well, I think that's all for this episode of State of the Hack. Join us next month. We'll be at Black Hat, and we'll be interviewing lots of folks. And then we'll put this up on YouTube and iTunes podcast for you guys to catch it.
See ya.